Thank you for joining us, Wendy. It's so good to see you. I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us tonight. And just in case people don't know, Representative Thomas does represent Merrimack, and she's known for environmental issues and really whatever the people of Merrimack need. It seems like Wendy has her name on it. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I am not new to opposition campaigns. Years ago, we started with the PFAS campaign, opposition campaign in Merrimack, and that's still ongoing. But that was my first, actually, before that was Kinder Morgan. It's just one thing after another. It just never stops. It's kind of like it is right now with our government. We recently had an opposition campaign to oppose the ICE facility in Merrimack. I found out about this on Christmas Day. A friend, or actually a constituent in Merrimack, tagged me on the infamous Washington Post article that identified the sites for these ICE warehouse detention facilities around the country, and Merrimack, New Hampshire was on this list. And I was in shock. This was Christmas Day, and I didn't know what to do. I knew this was going to be huge, but I was just overwhelmed with, what can I do? And within a matter of hours, really, I was sucked into this signal group of, at the time, it was 35 organizations. That's my dog, and I'm sorry. She's very cute, but she's poorly trained. So I was sucked into this organizational group on Signal, and it consisted of neighbors and advocates and leaders from across New Hampshire that had been mobilized spontaneously for this. It's like they were waiting for this to happen. And so the first thing that we did is, we being the town of Merrimack, we put out a statement, we being Representative Nancy Murphy, Representative Rosemary Rung, and myself. And we put out a statement within days of reading this article because we wanted to get our opinions, our stance out there in front of what the Republicans were going to say about this. We wanted to say we are against it, and we were not going to stand for it being in Merrimack. And so I'm going to tell you about the process that we used. But before I start that, I just want to tell you that I personally get a lot of credit for stopping this ICE facility, and that's just not true. I was the person out in front because I'm the elected official. So they chose me to give speeches. They chose me to stand out there. They chose me to make statements. But there was many, many villages behind me that worked on this. And they are the unsung heroes because they're not getting the credit for the work they did. And they absolutely should. So first of all, how did we do this? The first thing that we did is we defined the moral stakes of having a detention facility in our town. And we didn't talk about zoning. What we talked about, we didn't talk about what was being built. What we talked about is we questioned it and we worded it as, is this who we are? We certainly talked about the inhumanity and the violation of constitutional rights and the illegality, but we kept focusing on, is this who we are as a town? So then we paired that sort of moral statement, which is something that Democrats really cling to. We like the morality. We like sort of, the injustice message. The Republicans, to get them on board, what we did is we paired this morality message with economic loss to the town. So the warehouse would have cost us a loss of $529,000, so $500,000 in tax revenue for our town. That's significant. And that got even the most ardent Republicans' attention. We also talked about the impact to the police, to the fire, to rescue, to our traffic and our road structure, because this was going to really increase the use on all of this. So if you read anything that came from me, it always included the moral statement along with the economic impact statement so that we could get both groups, and I'm talking generally, but the Republicans and the Democrats on board. We always saw this as a nonpartisan topic in town. It was definitely partisan at the State House. Jason Osborne, he had put out a message that he was looking forward to the ribbon cutting ceremony for this detention center. Janine Nodder put out a statement that our town should celebrate this. So it was the Republicans in town, not the elected Republicans, that we were trying to reach. And then we built a coalition that was bigger than politics. And that's what I was talking about. We had neighbors. I reached out to clergy. We had leaders in our group. We had ACLU. We had business owners. And it wasn't just, we didn't just all enter this group and just start talking. I mean, there were people who obviously had excellent organizational skills. And we appointed one person to do all of the media. She did all of the press releases. She did all of the, statements, that kind of thing. We had one person who was dedicated to doing medical attention during protests. So they set up the table that had medical supplies for each of the protests that we had. We had one person who was organizing the peacekeepers, and so even though we had this big group of people, we sort of delegated to these specific leaders what their tasks were. And they were draconian in keeping to the topic. We had some people in the Signal group that were sort of advocating moderate violence. And we were like, that's your prerogative, but that's not what we're doing here. This is a peaceful protest that we're talking about, peaceful maneuvers. We had some people that were politicians that got into the group that started sort of self-campaigning. And, they were shut down, go ahead and campaign, just take it somewhere else. And so we were laser focused on our job. And, I would be up at the State House in my committee, and the committee we'd show up at 9, we'd break for lunch at 11:30, and I'd look at my phone and there'd be 85 messages from this Signal group, because that's how much we were just thinking on our feet at the time. So between Christmas Day and January 8th, that's when we had our first protest, and it was organized. They spoke with our chief of police. They spoke with our town manager. They spoke with the fire department to get clearance. We had plans. We showed them to the police. Because of what we saw in Minnesota, we had concerns about a mass shooting event, and we had plans that if there was a mass shooting, where we would direct people to be safe. We had parking information for people. It was just so incredibly well organized. And then the fourth thing that we did, so the first was define the moral stakes. The second was the economic loss. The third was build a coalition bigger than politics. And the next thing that we did is we used secrecy against the process. So we knew because of whistleblowers, we knew that Kelly Ayotte knew about this facility. We knew it, but we couldn't say anything. So a whistleblower had come and said that they knew about some papers that had been filed in this very specific department, which we would have never looked at. It was the Department of Historical Resources. Why would you file plans for a detention center there? Because you want to hide it. And so we knew those papers had been filed, but we couldn't say anything until they came out. So we sent that information over to the ACLU, who was magnificent in helping us out with everything. And they sent which is a right to know, to the state of New Hampshire. And if you read the story, that department turned around the right to know request in 24 hours. So we had those papers. Now, before we had those papers, knowing that we were getting them, I had written an op-ed that was run in both the Concord Monitor and the Union Leader, which are not exactly well known to be Democratic friendly. And it was a scorching op-ed that basically said Kelly Ayotte is either lying or she's incompetent if she doesn't know about these papers, because even we knew about them. But they didn't run that op-ed before we found the papers, even though I had submitted it before. They ran it after. They edited it so that it sort of looked like it was in the past. And that sort of framed the language. I started hearing people in town saying she's either lying or she's incompetent. So that was something that we did that was really, really effective. We got our messaging out front. Using the secrecy thing, we knew that, and there were several whistleblowers in this. We also knew that they had plans to extend the warehouse on the east side. We knew that they were going to use porta potties. We knew that they were going to use tents, like those big white tents we saw down in Florida, in New Hampshire. And we don't have the mosquitoes that they have in Florida, but we have the black flies. And can you imagine being in a tent, and they would not be screen-proof tents, in the spring in New Hampshire with the black flies. And also, I mean, just the fact that they were considering a warehouse to house people. We also knew the square footage because of whistleblowers. The square footage was 329,000 square feet in that warehouse. And there was a company that was taking up 1/3 of it at the time. So the warehouse was sold. We know it was sold, although we still haven't seen a deed to it. We're keeping our eyes on it because we believe DHS owns that warehouse, but we don't have a deed. A lawyer told me that if a private company buys a building, they usually file the deed within 1 to 2 days so that they can start their business. If the government buys a building, they have up to 6 months to file the deed. And so far, there's been no deed filed. The warehouse, I drive by it all the time now. There is a for lease sign on the warehouse. Before it was for sale, now it's for lease. So we're, we partnered with everybody. We got the information. We had people doing research. We linked arms with a group called Salt Box, who is they're volunteers, and they just do research on all of these sites around the country. And then the fifth thing that we did is we controlled the narrative of the identity. So we stopped talking about it being just a warehouse, and we started talking about it as being a concentration camp or a detention facility. It was no longer a warehouse. And we kept saying, going back to that original, this is not what Merrimack is. This is not who we are. And when you key into that, people, even the jerks in town, they care very, very deeply about their own community, and they want to protect it. So we kept saying that, this is a threat to our community, and that got us some leverage. And then the last thing is that we planned for endurance, not outrage. So we were planning protests every couple of weeks. We ended up having 2. We planned to have some kind of a newsworthy event every week so that we could keep it in the papers and keep it on people's minds. We linked arms with 50. We did rallies. We had legislative advocacy at the State House. Leadership tried to put an amendment into a bill about the warehouse, to stop the warehouse. We tried to suspend the rules in the House so that we could bring a bill forward, and of course that was shot down. And Rachel Maddow found out about this, and she contacted us, and that's when things really took off and things really got too hot for Kelly Ayotte. And she announced that the plans had been scrapped shortly after that because it was just too much heat. People paid attention to Rachel, So what's the formula that we used? We had moral clarity. We had local cost framing. And I see somebody taking notes. I've written this all down in a guide that you can have. So you don't have to take notes. You can if you want to. So we had moral clarity, local cost framing, a visible coalition, pressure for transparency, and persistence. And what we did is we created influence, and we created so much noise that Kelly Ayotte could not ignore us any longer. And, we were not expecting this to be stopped. And we're not even convinced that it stopped. We're keeping our eyes on it, but it's stopped for now. Our goal from day one was to put sand in the gears and to slow everything down enough so that we could get to the midterms. And hopefully we would have a change in the majority, a change in leadership at the State House. So that was always our goal, to do that. And then it was stopped. And then what we did is we had this big debrief. We had a postmortem on what we did, what was effective, what wasn't effective. Ro Khanna was in town. He met with the leaders of this group and wanted to hear about everything that we had done. And he wants to have an online national town hall about this and sharing, what we did and our strategy. So we're planning for that. I'm talking to people in Michigan and Minnesota. I'm going to be doing a speech down in Massachusetts with the Burlington ice facility. I mean, what we did, and I'm not trying to blow my own horn here, but what we did is a bunch of people got together and we won against the Trump administration. And that is something, isn't it, these days? And so we need people to know that. And if this does anything, it gives people hope that we can prevail if we stick together, if we link arms, if we're diligent, if we stay on task, we can do it. So that's sort of what we did. And I mentioned, I've written 2 guides recently. I wrote up the strategy playbook for this event, which is opposing the ICE facility. It talks about the ICE facility, but it can be used for any opposition campaign. It's just a framework. You can modify it any way you want. So I've sent that to the chair. I also, this summer, I wrote a guide to New Hampshire government and how to have your voice heard. And the link for that is available. And that resulted because we've been running listening sessions all over the state. We've held 51 listening sessions. And one of the comments that I kept hearing at these listening sessions was, we don't understand the government. We don't know how a bill moves through the House and the Senate. We don't understand all of those millions of committees and what they cover. And we don't know how to be heard. So I wrote a guide on that. I will warn you, it's a little spicy because I'm a tech writer and I originally wrote it and it was boring as all get out and I knew nobody was going to read it. So I wrote it in a different voice and the link is right there in the chat. And I'm getting feedback on the voice. People apparently like it. I mean, they're reading it to the very end, which is the goal. So the strategy playbook defines each of the steps that we took and it has checklists and everything. So, I used to be a teacher, a college level teacher. That's what I do, share information, make sure everybody has the skills to do what they need to do. So I am very happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thanks so much, Wendy. I know people have a lot of questions, so we'll go ahead and open the floor. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have any questions you'd like to ask, and I will pull up the document here to share with everybody. Catherine.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you. This is really inspiring and just what I needed to hear. So thank you. How often did you find you were partnering with allies you weren't suspecting? I mean, how did you sort of build your coalition? Because I think often that is difficult for Democrats. But I think it's so critical that we have to sort of reach out. So I'm curious how did you actually start doing that?
Yeah, so if you know Democrats, and we're all Democrats, if you get a bunch of Democrats in the same room, you'll never get anything done. Because everybody wants to have their opinion heard. They want to have their views incorporated into a final decision. It's not that you won't get anything done. It's just that it's a lot of extra work with Democrats because we want to be considerate of everybody. The signal group that we were in didn't work that way. If you were a problem, you were spoken to. And it wasn't me that did it. It was other women that God bless them, because they were ruthless, because we all knew that we had, literally a life or death problem here, and people were going to die if we didn't get this right. So we brought in people. A lot of people, when they found out about the signal group, they wanted to join, and it got too big at one point. So we split off, the leaders went into another group, and then we made decisions, and then we brought them back to the larger group. And we tried to have like one leader from each organization instead of, 7 people from the same organization. So we really had to be ruthless about who was in the signal group. The other thing is that it came with some risk, because we had been hearing that the FBI was actively searching for signal groups that were opposing ICE and going after those people. So we had to be very careful about who was let into the group. There was a lot of vetting, but there is within New Hampshire a very wide web of advocacy agencies that all talk to each other. I wasn't aware of this, but it's out there, and they just organized. They reached out to their allies, and we heard from everybody. And one of the most surprising allies that joined us, and I actually ended up having dinner with him, which was never on my bingo card, never. It was Gordon Humphrey, who is a former U.S. Senator. He was a Republican. He's now an independent. He said when Trump got elected, he went down to town hall and re-registered as an independent from a Republican. He was terrific. He gave us great advice, and he was a really strong ally. So I think, as people heard about these efforts, they reached out. Not everybody got into the signal group, but everybody who wanted to help heard about the rallies. They heard about what you could do, the protests, that kind of thing.
I also think that they wrote to Governor Ayotte. I think
Yes.
a lot of signing. I don't know. I guess I'm on a lot of people writing in to their local representatives as well as Governor Ayotte. And I think, as you said earlier, the pressure was too much for her.
Yeah.
Can we make pressure for her in other ways?
Well, see, I think that this is a game plan. I think we can. We also, thank you for reminding me. We said to everyone, write to Kelly Ayotte, write, call her, send email, write to her. And we also developed a petition, and we got 8,000 votes, 8,000 signatures on that petition. And we delivered that to her, even after she said the plan was scrapped, because we wanted her to know that should it ever rise its head again, that we were going to object to it.
Thank you. Hope.
Hi, Hope.
Hi, everybody. So this is more of an applause for Wendy than a comment or question. Truly, Wendy, your work, and I know that it is collaborative because that is who you are, is profound and inspiring. And I just could not offer enough respect. And Sullivan County is my community, and I want them to hear how much we appreciate you for so many things. I also want to reflect on a degree of parallel between what you all did in Merrimack and what some of us did in Croydon. I can't believe it's 4 years ago. The ability to bring people together on a single profound issue that is wrong for the community and find ways, and your extent was much greater because of the land that we're in and the topic, but to find people who would otherwise cancel each other out at the polls to say, I'm with you on this and I will work with you. We have to do more of that. We're not completely different from the other side when you get into local community. And I really strongly believe we need to find ways to make that work. So Wendy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for standing up and for making all this happen. I came across a really interesting statistic a couple days ago from the New Hampshire Business Magazine, and they were interpreting some recent demographics and found out that 2/3 of Granite Staters 25 and older are not natives. And so your comment about how confused people are and how they don't understand how government works and things like that. I mean, I was one of those people several years ago, and it's really hard to figure out New Hampshire.
Yes, it is.
Government works. And I wondered if you have a suggestion on what's the best way to get that message out to provide people with that information in a venue or a media that would be helpful for that.
Well, there is the guidebook that it's in the chat right there. Mm-hmm. So if you are a reader, which I am, that's helpful. And it has worksheets in it. It's got checklists. It's got ways to guide you. The first half is about the New Hampshire government and how crazy it is, and just describing it and saying how it works. The second half is how you can be most effective in getting your voice heard at the State House. So it's best practices on written testimony, oral testimony, contacting an elected official. There's even a little chapter on protesting safely, which we have to do these days. I want to get the word out. So if you're not a reader, I would be very happy to set up a workshop with graphics and slides and work through this guidebook and present it orally. But what this upcoming election is going to pivot on is us talking to our neighbors. And, Jean Deach in our neck of the woods, she used to be a senator. She's doing lots of stuff about the Free Staters. I'm finally hearing people say the words Free Stater. They're finally getting it. We've been banging that drum for years, but people are starting to get it. She is a one-woman show, going around the state with her workshop, explaining what the Free Staters are, explaining the damage that they do. So if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And I'll spend the summer going around the state.
I look forward to reading it. But is this something that the high schools would be interested, do you think? Or maybe some someone at Dartmouth or even the Rockefeller Center or something like that that would help spread the word?
Specifically with the guide, because it's a little spicy, I'm not sure that it's appropriate for high schools. Not that I'm a prude or anything, but no, high schoolers are paying attention. And so again, I could do, a class presentation on how the government works and how you can be heard. I'm willing to partner with anybody. I mean, I think those are really good suggestions, especially to the college kids. I think that they would really like this guide.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Misty.
I also want to say thank you so much for being here today. And also, we put on 4 listening sessions in Sullivan County. I think that's right. And so really appreciated your guide and your participation in that. That was really powerful. I wanted to ask about the safety issue because I hear that a lot from people who are worried about protesting, who are worried about participating, that they are concerned about blowback, not just locally, but nationally from federal organizations. And I wanted to know how you handled that.
So we were very concerned about safety because at the time, we were seeing everything from Minnesota, and Renee Good had just been killed. So we were very, very concerned about safety. Our town was also concerned about safety for the first protest. And they had probably 24 police officers at the protest, which it turned out to be overkill, but they were expecting violence. And they lined the parking lot because we held it in town halls, the town hall parking lot, with snow plows and tractor trailers, and so that people couldn't ram us. They were concerned about cars ramming us. And that's just where we are right now. That's the reality of the violence of politics right now. The second protest that we held, however, based on the first one, which was 100% peaceful, we even cleaned up the garbage afterwards. You wouldn't have known we were there the next morning. Because of that, they felt more comfortable with the second protest, but we didn't anticipate the number of people. I think 4,000 people showed up for the second one, and we had told them around 1,000, 500 to 1,000 would show up. So we had people lining the streets. And so we had a little bit of a problem with that, not necessarily safety wise, but certainly traffic wise. There was a little bit of an issue with that one. But, we were concerned. We were prepared for, the peacekeepers. I don't know if you've worked with peacekeepers. They're trained in de-escalation. There was one protester at the first event, and people went up and were sort of mocking him and everything. And the peacekeepers went up and said, no, he's got a right, to his opinion, as long, just as we do too. So I think you have to be very, very prepared. And, I even thought about wearing a bulletproof vest because I was out in front making the speeches and being very, very visible. I chose not to, but I did consider it at one point. It's a sign of the times. Violence is out there. In fact, I even have a bill that's in the Senate right now that would allow candidates to use some campaign money for personal security. The bill is based, I had met Senator Pappas from Minnesota, no relation to the Pappas in New Hampshire, but she had been on the list for the assassin that killed the Speaker of the House. And he knocked on her door. She was on vacation with her family. Had she been home, she probably would have been assassinated. So, times, especially if you're an outspoken woman Democrat, you got a target on your back. So I'm not sure I have an answer for that other than we're aware, we plan for it. We're very relieved when there's no violence.
And Catherine?
I just wanted to also mention the whole acuity recycling issue in a proposal that came to Claremont and still hasn't really gone away, even though the permit was denied. I think DES is having some call tomorrow, but I am just wondering and Claremont's done an absolutely amazing job fighting this proposal. And I worry that with New Hampshire DES, why are we back, maybe possibly reconsidering it? And it takes a lot of work for a community to keep fighting proposals like that. And I don't know how much of it is because there is pull, either there's pressure being put on DES politically from lobbyists or legislators like Ruth Ward or the governor. So I would love any suggestions on that. And also, I guess another question I have is, it seems increasingly now the legislature under Republican control, they don't really, you can see the testimony 2,000 to 1, and they'll still either kill or pass a bill. And so I don't know, how do you counter that? Does it have to be more of a public, how do you shame them into doing the right thing? So that's like a two-part question.
Yeah. So the first one, you talked about the proposal. What is the proposal on?
It's in some, I'm sure there's some people on the call that are more familiar, but it's the Acuity Recycling Plant Center that they want to have in Claremont, and they wanted their permit changed and expanded. And there was enormous grassroots effort last year at this time, I believe, an amazing hearing at the Opera House where people turned out. And I think other people can speak to it. But I think tomorrow DES is having another call to, and I don't have the specifics, but maybe Hope or someone does. But
Well, then let me just pop in here. So just to be clear, it's not recycling in a good sense, Wendy.
Yeah.
It's a little tiny recycling center that they're trying to make into a construction and demolition debris transit site. The site is completely inadequate. Toxic waste, who knows what's going to come there, to be supposedly sorted and then shipped by train because it's right beside the railroad station to somewhere else. So it's not recycling in the classic sense. And the thing tomorrow is at the, I'm having brain cramp, Department of Justice, Attorney General. It's like a case conference to decide how they're going to proceed, the rules of this appeal that Acuity, who was denied a permit, has appealed and was, going forward to try to get it.
Okay, so that helps. This kind of sounds, not that it's the same, but like the PFAS problem that we had in Merrimack. We knew it was bad for our town, and we tried to get DES's attention, but the Republicans are in control right now. They own everything. They've got the majority in the House, the Senate, the Executive Council, and they've got the governor. And the governor she bows to the Free Staters. And when I say Republicans, I really mean Free Staters. Their goal is to defund public education. They want to destroy public education. They also want to destroy government. And so right now they control everything and we are powerless. I mean, what we're doing is we're trying to ring the bell. We're trying to educate people on really bad bills that are passing and the impact that they're going to have on you and your property taxes. So things are not really great in New Hampshire right now. And I'm just being honest with you. That doesn't mean that there's not hope. I mean, we definitely have hope. The Republicans, and this is sort of to your second question, are behaving so abysmally right now that they're getting into the news. We've had Republicans that have threatened to murder Democrats who even talk about income tax. We have a sitting representative who invoked the final solution to a Jewish representative, Democratic representative, who invited everyone to a karaoke session after session. It was an invitation. And this guy invoked the final solution and said, theater kids, basically, we need to use the final solution, which is the German language for annihilate and kill Jews. That was Hitler's solution as the final solution. So, and we have a sitting representative who is advocating segregation in public school. They are drunk with power right now, and they are making tons of mistakes. And we are publicizing these mistakes left and right so that people know what their true nature is. I don't know if you've read the news. There hasn't been much because I can't say much, but I was kicked off of my committee. And I will tell you, there's not a final verdict on it, but I'm just going to give you I met with the speaker and he gave me 3 reasons for kicking me off of the committee, and hope you need to listen to this. Number 1, there are 2 Representative Thomases on my committee, and Representative Doug Thomas, Representative Wendy Thomas. Doug is a Republican. I'm a Democrat. I used to be the executive director of a nonprofit that advocated for the disabled community in New Hampshire. It's called the the New Hampshire Challenge. And so I asked them to identify me in committee as Representative Wendy Thomas, so that when someone who is deaf or hard of hearing reads the transcripts, they can tell which Representative Thomas is speaking. Sounds logical. That's one of the reasons they kicked me off of the committee. Now, remember, we've got people that are advocating murder. And I asked for an accommodation for the disabled community. Number two, our chair is an older guy and he's having memory issues. And I had sent him a report. He claims he lost the report. He claims he didn't get it. However, the ranking member, who is a Democrat, the highest Democrat on our committee, she got the report. So we don't know what happened there. But the next time I had to send in a report, instead of sending it to him directly, I sent it to our clerk, knowing that it would be safe there and that he could get it from her. He didn't like that. That was another reason to kick me off of the committee. And the third reason, and every single one of you ladies are going to recognize this one, and you're going to just love it. The speaker said that he didn't like my attitude. And I said, well, I'm surprised you didn't call me hysterical. Yeah. And I said, okay, fine. So it's my attitude. What about my attitude do you not like? And he said, oh, it's just everything you do. Okay. So the thing is, it's if I get kicked off, and I'm still waiting to hear from the speaker, it's just going to backfire on them because they're letting representatives who are violent and who are threatening others and who are talking about dismantling education, they're allowed to do whatever they want. But if I ask for an accommodation for the disabled community, I get kicked off. So it's crazy right now. It's absolutely crazy.
I put my hand up, and a rare moment for me, as you all know, I don't even know what to say. The idea that the speaker would use those excuses for removing an extremely informed, competent person from committee, where most of the work at the State House happens in committee, is reprehensible, and that is being really, really polite. Like, do we need a rule that says if there's two reps on committee with the same last name, they will be identified by their first name? I don't mean never mind being for the disabled community. I obviously support that. But it's just simply confusing to anyone,
right,
that we wouldn't do that. And in Finance Committee, there's a married couple. They say Representative Dan McGuire and they say Representative Carol McGuire, and you sure as heck can tell their voices apart if you have hearing. It's just normal.
Right. And I will tell you that my being kicked off of the committee had absolutely nothing to do with my op-ed calling Kelly Ayotte a liar and incompetent. It had nothing to do with my op-ed calling Free Staters a bunch of man babies. It had nothing to do with me opposing the ICE facility in Merrimack when the Republicans wanted it. And it certainly had nothing to do with me being on Rachel Maddow. So just so that we're clear about that.
So the question
not the slightest bit clear, Wendy, but thanks for trying.
The question is, I did see you on Rachel Maddow. I happened to be watching that night. You were excellent. The question is, what can we do? How can we get more Democratic votes? How can we change the balance of the state legislature?
Speak up. It's uncomfortable for a lot of people. Go to these protests, the No Kings. I'm actually going to be speaking at the Exeter one. I've gotten older people in my town. I've driven them up to Concord, and they're just aghast at, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that feels like this, and so go to these things, write letters to the editor, talk to your neighbors, put up signs in your yard. I mean, not just campaign signs, but signs that say, New Hampshire is not your free state project. Just be loud, but be controlled. Here I am. Don't be hysterical, because then people won't take you at your word, but be loud, use facts, and also employ that technique of using morality with economic loss so that you get both sides, so that you're not sort of seen as a bleeding heart. You're seen as someone who cares about people in your community as well as the financial impact.
Right. Yeah, Wendy, this is been great. At first, I was like, I sort of know what you've been doing, but it is amazing. I wanted to just, speaking about getting the word out, at our recent town meeting, 2 Republicans came up to me basically saying, what the hell is going on? And so I think there is an undercurrent there. And what it makes me want to do is, as we get into the campaign season, is not just knock on Democrat doors, but go to the Republicans because there are a lot of people out there who are just like normal, reasonable people who just reflexively vote Republican. But if we talk to them, and a lot of them are beginning to wonder what's going on, like those two people at the meeting. And I think that maybe we have a way to get some people to recognize that they're not voting for Republicans anymore. They're voting for free staters. They're voting for extremists who don't share their values.
Exactly. When I talk to the Republicans that live in my town that are not elected, they realize that the world has gone nuts right now. I mean, they're very aware of this. Some of them, don't want to say anything out loud because, let's face it, sometimes for some people, their political party is part of their identity, especially, down south. Daddy was a Republican, I'm a Republican, that kind of thing. But we have to be careful in our wording because we can't sort of damn all Republicans, but we can damn the extremists. And so I'm very careful to call them extremists or to call them the Republicans in Concord or to call them the elected Republicans so that there's a little bit of space between the people who are trying to break the state and the people who still hold Republican values. And, my dad, both of my biological father and my stepfather, they were both Republicans, and it used to be that Republicans were for fiscal responsibility and Democrats were for the same fiscal responsibility, but threw in a little bit of social justice in there as well. So we do agree on the same thing, but 100% correct. We can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So it's so important to not blame the Republicans for Trump, although it's really hard not to. We just have to sort of, forgive that and move on because there are a lot that things are dire right now and they want to join us, but they don't want to be shamed into joining us. So absolutely right. You're 100% right.
Bringing together of what Bill and Wendy so wisely said, we need to help people who have not voted on our side of the aisle to be comfortable doing that. And while we may personally be angry or want to shame them, that is unproductive entirely in interactions. And we need to bring them over, whether it's quietly or more boldly. I have been saying to many people who say, what can I do? Talk to 3 or 5 people that you don't know if they vote or how they voted. Because if they're rabid MAGA, you probably know how they voted. And if they're us, you probably know how. So talking to the people that you don't know how they voted in a very calm, wow, I'm really concerned about the way things are going. How are you doing? To try to bring people into conversation so they can become more able to participate with us, because we have got to change the lay of the land. We're not going to win any votes. Well, I shouldn't say not any, but we're not going to win most of the votes of substance with the population who's currently elected. So we have to make a change in November.
Yeah, and when the state party always wants us to canvass. They canvass, 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 and they always give us this script, this phony script that we're supposed to. I don't know what they think we're supposed to do with it, but it just doesn't sound right. And I have found what's most effective, to Hope's point, is to go up to a door and say, "Hey, I'm Representative Wendy Thomas. I represent the town. What are you thinking about what's happening in our town and our state right now?" Just sort of an open question like that. What are your concerns, to Hope's point? And that starts dialogue. But if you go up and you say, you're probably one of those Republicans, look what you've done, we're not going to get anywhere. But education, education, education is the key.
Ellis?
One just quick one is that some of the messaging folks have been suggesting, instead of saying why when somebody tells you that they believe in some crazy thing going on there, is to talk about, so how would that work? To open a conversation is much less accusatory than why is. And then oftentimes they'll just work through themselves to find out that, I guess that isn't going to work. So smarter people than me have found that out. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah. And from I'm just writing notes here, from the listening sessions, the 4 topics that came up all the time were housing, education, healthcare, and property taxes. And what we did, we being Democrats, the last election, we focused almost entirely on abortion and trans issues. And I'm not saying those aren't important issues. Of course they are. But we're Democrats. People know that we're for trans rights. They know that we're for a woman's right to choose, and so what that did is that made people uncomfortable, because a lot of those are very tricky topics for some people, and even Democrats, a lot of Democrats are like, they can do whatever they want as long as they leave me alone, that kind of thing. Even, women with abortions, they can have their abortion as long as it doesn't affect me. There are some Democrats like that. But when we kept hammering and hammering and hammering, what we were really being seen as, because the Republicans worded it this way, we were the baby killers, and we were for boys and girls bathrooms. The Republicans are very effective at messaging. We're not so good, but we're working on it. So this time we have to focus on those four things: housing, education, healthcare, and property taxes. That doesn't mean you can't add in something specific to your town, like the recycle center, or like PFAS, or something else that's happening locally. Of course you're going to talk about that. But Democrats, we like to bring charts and graphs and prove to people that this is why they should think the way they should. The Republicans tend to use fear. I'm not saying that we should use fear, but they use emotion. And so if we say things like, this is not what our town is, that's an emotion that grabs people. And we can use statements like that very effectively.
So I want to give you all a little hope. I was at a meeting last night, and it was pure data. It was a good explanation that when Trump's on the ballot, things go more Republican. 2026, he won't be on the ballot, so it should be better in our favor. The other thing he said was, it's not so much getting the Republicans to vote. We have a very big undeclared population. And he said it's really moving more toward the Democrats in some voting years. So that's really who we need to talk to, is the people who are undeclared, because Republicans are generally going to stay Republicans. I've been a Democrat my whole life. I would probably never vote Republican. So we've got a big middle section that could be influenced. And what he said was they're looking more Democrat lately than not. So I just wanted to put that out there as a positive. And thank you, Wendy. Wendy's one of my favorite reps. So go get them, girl.
I think people are just fed up with the nonsense, the constant chaos that is going on. Merrimack has traditionally been a very red town. It's considered purple. We have 8 reps. We have about 30,000 people in our town. We have 8 reps, and right now we have 3 Democrats. The most we've ever had was 4, and that was historic. But I think we're going to get a few more this coming election. People are fed up, and it starts affecting children also. And that's why we have to bring up the whole school fiasco. I mean, our kids are suffering. And another good talking point that has come up is I've talked to a lot of older people, not older, but with adult children, and their adult children are moving out of the state because they can't afford to live in New Hampshire. We want our kids to live near us, and we want our grandchildren to live near us. And that's not happening because of how the state is being run. So we've got the federal problems with Trump. We've got the state problems with free staters. We've got a lot of cleaning up to do, and it looks, and knock on wood, here's my table. It looks like we're probably going to at least take the House. But if we get the House, at least we can stop the bad bills and we can push forward the good bills. So that's the beauty of at least having the House.
Wendy, somebody asked if you could give some insight into some key science, tech, and energy issues.
So the Republicans, they're wed to fossil fuels. And so they've been dismantling all of our renewable energy projects. In fact, I'm going to be speaking on the floor on Thursday about the RGGI, the Renewable Energy Fund, which they want to just kill completely. And the whole point of that was supposed to reinvest money into New Hampshire, which would have meant jobs, and it would have meant lower energy costs. If we had been on this 10 years ago, it wouldn't, that what's happening in the Middle East wouldn't be as painful as it is right now. We're seeing one of our reps, Megan Murray, she just filled up her oil tank and it's $2 more per gallon than the last time she filled it up per gallon. That's crazy. And we all drive our cars and we're seeing the gas go up daily. The Republicans killed offshore wind. They've killed solar rebates. They want us to be wed to fossil fuel because that's who gives them money. Let's face it. And that's where the money is. So there's lots of lobbyists that support fossil fuels. And the other thing is that the Free Staters are really, really big on nuclear energy. And I do think that, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, we probably will be able to use nuclear energy. But they want unregulated small nuclear energy devices in New Hampshire so they can set up sort of their own energy grid. And just imagine, these things are regulated for a reason. You can't just dump nuclear waste in the woods. That's going to be crazy. And these people, they're not nuclear scientists. They're not nuclear technicians. They don't know how to install them. They don't know how to take care of them. Another bill that actually it passed, because again, we don't have the numbers, is they are spending $250,000 to investigate whether or not New Hampshire can remove itself from the energy grid, which is ISO New England. The energy grid pretty much covers all of New England. And the beauty of the grid is that if New Hampshire has a problem and our energy goes down, the other states can send us energy. So it's insurance. We make energy. Seabrook makes energy. They send it down to Connecticut. We all sort of help each other. They want to remove us from the energy grid. And the reason for all of these bills is that ultimately their dream is for New Hampshire to secede from the Union. They want New Hampshire to be an independent country, which is insane. First of all, that's treason. To even suggest that's considered treason. And don't you think that the American military is going to fight any state that threatens to leave the Union? You can't just vote and leave the Union. And during a hearing a couple of years ago when they were talking about this, there was a question about how, if we are an independent country, how would we defend ourselves? And some guy who was testifying, he said, well, all of us have guns. So they're going to go pew, 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 pew against our military? Please, and that's also what's behind all of these bills. We get these ridiculous bills and they sound ridiculous, but if you put them into the big picture, we see what they're doing. There was a bill that would force employers to pay employees in gold. Now that's crazy. Why would we do that? Because if we secede from the Union, we can't use dollars. We can't use American currency. So that's why they're also pushing Bitcoin. There's a huge push for Bitcoin because it's an independent form of currency. So it's just insane. They want to get us off of the energy grid. They want to kill all renewables. They want data centers. That's another thing we see in our committee. They're really big on data centers because there's a lot of money putting those in, and data centers are very, very, very bad for our environment. Very bad. And they're energy hogs. So that's from ST&E. That's science, technology, and energy. We get all of those bills.
Speaking of who's making money on all of these things, right? Usually there's somebody making money. And Stephanie had put in the chat about her letter to the editor that was published today. And we know that there's probably some strong financial or vested interest in the background happening. And she was asking, given the state of journalism, how can we get an investigation done for the real information, and how can we find a whistleblower?
You have to be trustworthy for a whistleblower to come up to you. That's the first thing. But you have to also let people know that you would welcome that kind of information. And a whistleblower came up to me and I said, as soon as I pass the information on, I have never met you. I don't know your name. I don't know who you are. No one will ever get that information from me anyway. So that's number one. Number two is we have some very effective media organizations in New Hampshire that are doing a pretty good job of investigating. And that's NHPR. So that's one. In-Depth New Hampshire, NH Bulletin, and I think Granite Post is new, but I've heard good things about Granite Post. So you have to pitch the idea. So what you have to do is the groundwork. You've got to do the research. You've got to pitch basically a proposal for a story. You know, what the problem is, why it's a problem, how could it be solved, and what are some ways that you can get support, you know, that kind of thing. And the other thing is personal stories always matter. They always matter. I can't even tell you how many times in a testimony for a bill, a hearing for a bill, we'll hear a personal story that we remember forever. And sometimes that switches votes because we're like, we had no idea this was going on. So all of those things together, if you can come up with a proposal that includes some personal stories, that have quotes from people, and basically you've got to market your idea. You've got to sell it.
Great. It's really useful. This is such a rich conversation. I know you've put it out there that you're willing to do anything, and it would be great to have a follow-up conversation. And I will also share with everybody who signed up the documents that you sent my way. I'll send those directly to people so that they have them in hand. I really appreciate you sharing all of the knowledge that you've developed, and what an incredible, generous resource for you to have developed it so that we can all learn from what you've done and what everybody has done in Merrimack, but also building on your years of advocacy. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. My pleasure. If anybody has any questions, I will give you my personal email. You can send me email anytime. I will answer any questions, and I'd be very, very happy to come back. And I'd be happy to be there in person if people need the visuals.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I hope that you all have a great night.
Good night, everybody.